Hi, this is Tim Whiting. So most people know that New York City is the financial capital of the world. And what better place to hold a conference than right in the middle of Times Square at the New York Marriott Marquis. So come and join the Investments and Wealth Institute for our Investments and Wealth Forum, which will be held November 28th through 30th. Got a great agenda of speakers. It's the largest gathering of SEMA, CPWA, RMA, and CFP certificates in the metropolitan area. And you're just going to have a great time, a great experience, and get to see all the things that New York has to offer.
We're proud to welcome you to the Exceptional Advisor podcast series, brought to you by the Investments and Wealth Institute. This series aims to help you to better serve your clients, differentiate yourself from the competition, and enhance your ability to communicate those differences. Hi, I'm your host, Bob Powell.
My guests today are Danielle Labotka, she's a behavioral scientist at Morningstar, and Sam Lamas, she's a senior behavioral researcher also at Morningstar, and co-authors of the report, Why Do People Hire Their Financial Advisor? So Danielle and Sam, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
It's a pleasure. So before we get going, for the benefit of our viewers and listeners who may not be familiar with you and your background and your work, do you mind giving us a brief description? Danielle, you want to go first?
Yeah, so I actually come from an academic background. So I did my PhD in psychology at the University of Michigan and then continued on afterwards as a postdoc for a while. And so I was doing a lot of research in cognitive psychology, but one of the things that is kind of difficult in the academy is to have a real practical application to your research. There are certainly researchers in academia who do that well, but it's certainly more difficult. It's, the ivory tower for a reason. And so I started to think about how I could do research that could really help people live their lives in a better way. And I think that that's really something that behavioral finance does well. Everybody has to deal with money in our society. Even the people who say I'm going to let somebody else make the decisions for me, they still have made a money decision in doing that. And so I think that one of the great things about the Behavioral Insights team at Morningstar is that we do a lot of research about how people think and act towards their money, but then we also take a very serious approach in thinking about, well, what can we learn that can be applied in people's lives? What can be learned that can be applied by financial advisors? And one of the great things that we have the opportunity to do a lot of is talk to financial advisors like your audience who are really engaged and wanting to learn more about how, behavioral research can help them do their job better. And that's something that also helps us do our job better. And so I'll let Sam talk a little bit more about kind of the different approaches that we take on that.
Yeah, Sam, eager to learn more about you and your background.
Yeah. So my name is Samantha Lamas. I'm a senior behavior researcher here at Morningstar. I've been here a couple years, and as Danielle mentioned, part of what our team does is try to better understand how real people make real decisions with their money in imperfect environments. So we all know that we're not all perfectly rational creatures. So we kind of come in with that knowledge and try to better understand how we could help people, lead them in the right directions with their finances. And usually that results in white papers, insights, exercises, tools. We're always trying to make this actionable for investors and advisors to serve them.
Right. So you both just co-authored a recent bit of research titled, Why Do People Hire Their Financial Advisors? I'm sure our audience really wants to know more about this topic and this study. So walk us through it.
Yeah. So for this paper, there's kind of this existing narrative out in the field that advisors get hired to handle this one specific issue that the client is facing. But we think there's more to the story, specifically because you have research like Vanguard, right, that show that one of the most important things advisors do is this behavioral coaching angle. So we wanted to better understand how behavioral coaching or these more emotional factors factor into the hiring decision. So in our research, we asked people, please list some reasons why you hired your financial advisor. It was completely open text. People were given the flexibility, the space, the privacy to just write in their own thoughts. And what came out was very emotional. So as you'll see in the paper, some of the top reasons people hire their financial advisors are specific financial needs. So we do see that. We do see that one pop up, but we also see things like trying to help clients handle their own discomfort handling financial issues, or behavioral coaching. So people want a second opinion, a guiding hand, etc. We also see recommendations coming in. So referrals, advisors already know that one. And also we see that the quality of relationship the client has with their advisor really factors into an advisor actually getting hired. Anything I missed there, Danielle?
Right. And
No, I think that's a great summary.
so when you talk about people coming in to hire a financial advisor, they don't necessarily say, well, they might say, I need help saving for retirement or saving for my children's college education or whatever it might be. They don't necessarily come in and say that I'm having trouble managing my money, or do they?
I think it'll depend on the person, but in general, there is kind of this tendency that people have to want to have kind of good stories about themselves, right? Nobody wants to be the villain in the story or the sidekick. Everybody wants to be their own hero. And so walking into an office with a complete stranger and potentially your spouse, you're going to be subjected to this social desirability bias, which basically is, we want to act in a way that, makes us look good to the people around us. And so if you come in the door and you're like, hey, I am terrified of saving for retirement and I have no idea what I am doing, right? That's probably not the image you want to present to yourself, to a stranger, to a loved one who maybe is depending on you as their primary source of income, or depending on you for a whole slew of other things. And so it is one of those things where financial advisors know that emotions are very important in the financial advising process. But when people come into the office for the first time, they're not necessarily going to be ready to talk about those with you. And so being able to take a step back and say, hey, maybe the person is not going to walk in and directly tell me their hopes, fears, and dreams right off the bat in a very vulnerable way. But I can make an educated guess that the person in front of me might be feeling that, right? So when we look back at our findings, we saw that, those specific financial goals and needs, that showed up about in a third of the responses that we got from participants. So if somebody sits down in front of you and they say, I want help with retirement, and you're like, great, here are all the ways I can help you with retirement, there's a chance that you're talking to somebody who would have given us a response that was completely different. And you're not tapping into those concerns if all you're doing is talking about, here's how I'll resolve this specific issue that you have. And so being able to kind of read their mind without pointing fingers, I feel like is a great thing that people could do. Talk about, yeah, we can help you save for retirement. And, one of the things that I see with a lot of my clients are that people are worried about how they're going to get there. And they feel like they're going to make mistakes. And, I'm somebody who can help you learn how to do the right thing. I'm somebody who can be a sounding board to help you make good decisions, to help you through those complicated times in the market. And so it's kind of a way of like bringing it up without saying, hey, I bet you're feeling really scared right now. Because again, people don't typically like to feel like they are being seen as less than the hero of their own story.
Right. And certainly they don't want to be judged for maybe not having done it well enough, right, to have their the skeletons in their closet come out about whatever they've done wrong with their money.
Yeah. And the only thing I would add there is that was one of the strengths of our experimental design or design of our survey in particular, because we were asking people in an open text online survey, they weren't facing that social desirability bias. They weren't in front of that stranger that is swaying what they're saying. So that's why what came out was kind of contrary to what maybe advisors usually get in that first meeting.
Tell me more about in the report, you talk about who actually hires a financial advisor. There's some interesting findings there.
Yes, and I did pick that up because I know that's something that people are always interested in. So for that analysis, we actually looked at a few different factors. So we did find that individuals who had hired an advisor had a higher income, higher amount of investable assets. They tend to be older, and thus have more years investing. We also found that a greater proportion of women were more likely to hire a financial advisor. Um, and a greater proportion of white investors were more likely to hire a financial advisor. So nothing too surprising there, except maybe the woman one, which is kind of, I think, pretty interesting.
Yeah. Do you think there's anything to be said about how advisors might target their prospects, or how they might think differently about prospecting?
Yeah, so actually, as part of our paper, one of the things we did at the end of the paper is that we provided this exercise on messaging or marketing materials, which is one way of prospecting, right? So in that exercise, we call it a value prop makeover. So we give advisors this three-step process is try to rephrase some of their messaging to sort of tap into these more emotional factors that investors may be coming to them in the first place for. So we could talk a little
So,
bit more about that.
sure. Well, I want to go through all
Yeah.
the you have the three action items that are in the report as well. There is one thing I wanted you to sort of cover, which was this notion of some takeaways. And one of the takeaways that I thought was really interesting is having to do with recognizing that clients and prospects don't want to talk about you helping them control their emotions or staying in control of their emotions. I'm eager to learn more about that, because I think a lot of advisors think that's what they do, is they take the emotion out of investing or financial planning or investment advice, but that may be the wrong message.
Yeah. So one of the things that we know from research that Vanguard has done is that, behavioral coaching is one of the major quantifiable value adds that advisors provide their clients. But we've done previous research that kind of looked at the ways in which you can talk about behavioral coaching to clients, and it's found that not all wording is created equal. So people don't typically like the phrasing of behavioral coaching, or they don't want to hear about, I need to stay in control of my emotions. Again, it comes back to what kind of story do you want to tell about yourself? Like, are you wanting to tell the story, I'm somebody who flies off the handle if I see a negative red number in my portfolio for the day? Probably not, right? And so there are some other ways that we can talk about it that kind of sidestep that emotional component that people might be a little bit more receptive to. So something like talking about helping people avoid common behavioral mistakes seems to be better received than talking about staying in control of emotions. I don't know if you have something to add to that, Sam, based on that previous research I'm talking about.
Yeah. So exactly. So maybe we can dig into that previous research because it's one of my favorites. So in a previous research project, we asked investors what they valued most in a financial advisor. We also asked advisors what they think investors value, but that's on the side. And what investors said was where they placed behavioral coaching was all the way at the bottom of their list. Like it was dead last. It was falling off the page. They clearly didn't understand the value of this attribute. And one thing we realized that could be a product of how we were describing it. So we called it helps me stay in control of my emotions. So as Danielle pointed out, people don't like being told that they need help controlling their own emotions, and that really came out in our survey results there. So we followed up that study with another iteration where we tried out 5 different ways of describing behavioral coaching. Um, and we found out that at least 3 of the ways of describing behavioral coaching did move the needle a little bit. So it wasn't dead last on people's list anymore. It was somewhere in the middle. So there's no magic wand, right? We're not going to get everyone on board, but quite a few more people did recognize the value of this attribute just by changing a few words around. So Danielle mentioned one that seemed to help people, and which was um, helps me make financial decisions with a cool head. So using that colloquial language also helps me avoid common behavioral mistakes. So that word common there, that's what Danielle referred to, just helping clarify for the person these are issues that we all face. It's not something particular to them. We also found success with helps protect my portfolio from excessive emotional reactions. So just giving them that example of panic selling during downturns, that's something that I think everyone can sort of relate to, that sinking feeling in your stomach when the market is going crazy and you see your portfolio following suit. So making it real for people and helping them recognize like, hey, maybe I do need some help with that. And that's where a behavioral financial advisor, we like to call them behavioral coaches as well, can sort of play into that.
Yeah. And certainly when I think about all the other research that's around behavioral coaching, the Vanguard study, others, the interesting thing is how much alpha it adds to the relationship, right?
Yes.
And so maybe it's unseen to the client what is happening, but in terms of alpha, there's a lot of value that can be added.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the things that we see a lot in this research and in other research, which is that like clients and investors, they don't know what they don't know about what financial advisors bring to the table. And I think that that's something that is a bit of an uphill battle for financial advisors. When you are in the thick of it, it's your profession, it's your bread and butter, you do it every day. Sometimes we forget that what we know about financial advising is not common knowledge. And so giving people at the start some idea of the things that financial advisors can do for them outside of handling their portfolio, like that behavioral coaching, which is a great alpha generator, can be really eye-opening for people and help them see, well, oh, I didn't even know this was something that a financial advisor could help me with. But now I do, and that sounds great. Like, who doesn't want more alpha? Pretty much nobody would say that they would turn that down if given the opportunity. So I think that that's something when we go to the exercise and start to think about it a little bit more, I think it's important to try to remember what it feels like to not know what financial advisors do. Or think about somebody who you care about who has no idea what you do for a living. And so you have to explain it to them, to put yourself in the position of somebody who doesn't necessarily know all the things. And being able to convey that value and the ways in which financial advisors can help people outside of what they might expect is, I think, a very powerful thing advisors can do in that prospecting phase.
Yeah. Just a quick follow-up, Danielle. Like when I think about behavioral coaching, I think about it sort of in extremes, which is on the one hand, I might sort of explain to you what loss aversion is or recency bias or overconfidence, but that's not necessarily what you're talking about, like teaching your clients about these cognitive biases that they may have, right? It's something different than that.
Yeah, it's more about being somebody who can put up guardrails along the way, right? What we know from previous research on cognitive biases is that like knowing that you have a cognitive bias does not stop you from falling prey to it. It does not stop you if you are a professional. It does not stop you if you're a cognitive scientist and this is what you study for a living. And so I think that it's important for everybody to recognize that, yes, it's good to know that these biases exist and it can be very informative to people, but education on its own is not really enough. So how can we take it a step further into action? And when you look at a lot of our reports, that's kind of the direction that we take it in, is like, okay, well, you can teach a certain level of like, here's what a cognitive bias is and here's how it might affect you in market downturns, but let's create a plan so that, you know, and as an advisor, you can provide actual tools, solutions, safety nets, so that when those cognitive biases are going to be the most primed to take effect and have people make mistakes that they're going to regret later, that as a financial advisor, you can still step in and help redirect that behavior so that that's not what happens. So that, yeah, you thought about it, right? You fell prey to recency bias. You said the market's going down. It's going to keep going down. It's all going to go away. But you didn't act on it. or you acted in a way that was productive. And I think that's what financial advisors can really do, is not just teach, but also know when to step in and how to redirect.
Sam, anything to add to that?
I think I would go with a more dire outlook, which is that not only do investors not understand everything that advisors bring to the table, but they have this wrong misconception of what advisors do. So going back to that value advice research I mentioned, among pretty high on the list was maximizing returns. So investors still have this idea that an advisor's job is just to maximize returns, which is not a good narrative, right? Because one, it's something that's very dependent on the market, right? So if the market goes down, it's the advisor's fault. And I think we see that a lot in how investors talk about their advisors. And then two, if we're just focused on returns and portfolios by themselves, I mean, that's something that technology has really come in and helped people manage on their own without an advisor. So that's one of the things that we're hoping that this paper can do, at least on the individual investor side, just open people's eyes to everything an advisor can do besides just financial things. So when we split up people's motivations for hiring, we were very careful to make sure we included financial factors, but also these emotional factors, because advisors do provide it all. So it's important to help clear up some of those misconceptions for investors and know what they should expect when going to an advisor's office.
Yeah. So do you find that some advisors are better at doing this than others? And for those that aren't doing it well, is there hope for them to change their ways?
Yeah. So this is more just from anecdotal evidence, right? Just talking to people. I do feel like some advisors do it better than others. Like some investors are going to advisor just for one-off advice, which is fine, right? That could work for them. But some investors are going to an advisor where they have a relationship, where something goes wrong in their lives and they're like, oh, I have to call my advisor to see how this is going to affect my finances. And we do think there's hope for the advisors who want to take on a more behavioral, emotional approach.
Yeah. In your paper, you mentioned the 3 takeaways for advisors. Emotions come into play at every stage. I think we talked about that, but is there anything else to add around that topic by chance?
I think that it's one of those things where it's almost like advisors already know this, but they don't necessarily overtly indicate that. So we talked a little bit about referrals earlier, and I think that that's an excellent example of financial advisors already know that referrals are important. And they're not just reviews, right? Reviews can be a bit more like, here's, how I objectively try to evaluate the services I received from this financial advisor. Referrals matter because people like to find people from people they trust, right? If my friend trusts you, then I should be able to trust you. And that's an emotional component that financial advisors already knew was at play in the prospecting stage. It's just that it goes beyond that. It's not just, oh, I can get people because of trust that I've built with others. It's also this part of these unspoken emotions that people might be feeling, and making sure that that's incorporated into that stage of the financial advisor-client relationship so that you can capture, that need that clients have early on and really set that relationship up for success in the long term.
The other takeaway that's mentioned, number 2, is recognize that some needs may remain unspoken. Talk more about that, and maybe also address this notion that even though it remains unspoken, you don't have to make them speak it, right? You just have to recognize that it's unspoken and sort of in the back of your mind deal with that.
Yeah, so that's kind of the point that we've been hammering down on, is that you can't expect a client to walk into your office and say, I need behavioral coaching or I need emotional support. But instead, if only, right? Instead, advisors have to figure out a subtle way of addressing those needs. And that's something that we really get into in the actual exercise, because it's about addressing the needs without pointing that finger and being a little accusatory in some ways.
Yeah. So I think we talked enough about how you say it matters, unless there's something more to add there. And if not, I'd love for you to sort of take us through the 3-step exercises.
Yeah, we can get into the exercise. I think that's a fun one. And it's a one that we've talked to a few advisors about it before, and I always love to see reactions from it. I mean, we can't get the reactions here, but we can get your reactions, which is going to be nice. Okay, so the first step is really just a brainstorming activity. So we ask advisors to list out everything they do for their clients, which can be a pretty long list, but make sure to address both the emotional and financial support that you provide. And then we ask them to categorize that list into the top 3 reasons why we find that investors hire their financial advisor. So, as a reminder, those were to address the client discomfort handling financial issues, their need for behavioral coaching, and to address a specific financial need. 2 emotional, 1 very financial. So, we ask them to write down their lists and organize it into those 3 categories. Once they have it organized into those 3 categories, it's about working these topics into their messaging. But before you do that, you have to rephrase, right? You have to make sure that you're framing it in a way that can resonate within an individual investor. So when it comes to handling or to communicating client discomfort, we advise that advisors shouldn't go and list out all the ways that the client can be uncomfortable. Instead, listing out the reason or the ways in which you address discomfort in your practice, right? So even give me an example. So for example, a lot of my clients today cite having peace of mind when they're working with me, that they're more at ease with their finances. So giving those sort of anecdotal evidence of providing client comfort in your actual communications. When it comes to behavioral coaching, so as we talked about, wording matters, and you can't just point out that people need emotional support. So one of the things we recommend is providing examples of what behavioral coaching is. So, right, behavioral coaching is some aspect of teaching. It's about guidance, about being that sane voice. So having those examples in your language instead of just saying behavioral coaching. And when it comes to specific financial need, I think it's all too easy just to list out that you can provide retirement advice or, inheritance advice or whatever else you do. But it's important for advisors to then connect it back to a person's financial goals or their motivation for saving in the first place. So this deeper why of why they're saving money and making money and doing all this. And advisors are really in this key area to help people make those connections and have that more deeper conversations with their clients. And then step 3, or once you have those rephrases, it's about making it into a value prop that's 1 to 2 paragraphs long. In the exercise, we actually provide a few examples of us going through this exercise with a fictitious value prop that we actually source from reading advisors' articles or reading advisors' websites and creating our own. So it's not anyone's specific value prop, but it's kind of inspired by actual language that advisors tend to use. And you can see us going through, crossing things out, etc. And then in step 3, it's kind of more of a writing tip than anything, but it's about making your messaging clear. So we give the example, or we give the advice of going through your value prop draft, highlighting the areas where you're addressing these top 3 financial reasons or reasons that people hire their financial advisors, and then taking a good hard look at everything that's not highlighted and editing it out if you can. And so that can mean taking out some details that you thought were important, but maybe the advisor or the investor does not need to know at this first touch point of communicating with you. And then at the end, you're left with this much shorter value prop that's really punching hard at these top 3 reasons people hire their financial advisor. And we even give the advice of rearranging, so making sure you're beginning and ending with an emotional reason of why they should hire you, for example.
And the end goal of this exercise is to attract more clients, retain the ones you have, expand the relationships that you have with your existing clients?
Yeah, I think more so to attract more clients, because we recommend that this sort of communication can be used in marketing materials on your website. However, I mean, even the rephrasing exercise or that part of the exercise, that can change how you describe what you do for your clients, even during your conversations with them.
Yeah. I think when you asked earlier if there was hope for like advisors who are not so great at these things at first glance, this is a great example of, how you can start to rework those skills a little bit. And the practice of going through and thinking critically about, well, how am I describing these things? How am I presenting them? It's really important at these initial stages when you have no relationship with the people reading it, or next to no relationship with it, because it is kind of your first impression, right? And we all have heard that first impressions matter and are very important. And so it's really great to get these right. But also, as Sam is pointing to, as you start working on rephrasing how you're talking about these things in these introductory communications with clients, you might stumble upon something where you're like, hey, that sounds pretty good. I might be able to communicate this with clients who are having issues understanding X, whatever it was I just rephrased. And so getting the practice of thinking critically about what you say, how you say it, how you structure it is really important for those introductory, communications, but they can be applied to thinking about your practice more broadly.
Yeah. I mean, given that your prospects might be heterogeneous, there's no way to do like A/B testing around this, right?
Probably not. It would be a lot of it would take quite a while to do that, and yes, you would need a lot of information to get it truly tested in a scientific manner. But you can start to think about reflecting on your own experiences when you have people walking in the door. Do you feel like things are going better? Do you think that you're having more productive conversations? Are you maybe getting more of those more vulnerable responses earlier out the gate, that can help you, help people define their goals, help them figure out a plan that works for them, help them avoid mistakes that they might be prone to making? So it's probably not something that you're going to be able to do a very quantitative thing with, but I would say, think about it as an iterative process. Is this getting, seemingly better responses? And if not, go back to the drawing board. And also, something I'm a big advocate of is showing your work to other people and asking for feedback. I know it's uncomfortable. Like, Sam and I do a lot of writing, and it is never fun to be like, here, look at what I did. I'm so proud of it. I spent time on it. And then people be like, well, that didn't really hit home for me. And so I know it's uncomfortable, but the only way to get comfortable with that is to keep doing it. And so ask people that you admire and respect, or ask people who you think are going to provide honest feedback. And also, you can look at, again, the value propositions of people who you think do this well and see, well, how do I think that they compare to me? Is there something they're doing that speaks to these concerns in a way that I'm not? So I think that there's a lot of levels and layers to it. And it really is one of those, like, be a lifelong learner. Don't ever be content to rest on your laurels. And I think over the time, you'll get better at these things as we do whenever we practice something, even if it makes us uncomfortable.
I'm certain that after you've gone through a dissertation defense, you're open to revisions and feedback.
Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah. They, at a dissertation defense, they'll be like, cool. So you can graduate, but before you do, we want you to rewrite this entire section of your dissertation. So you get really used to being told to do it again, do it better.
My son has a friend who just got his PhD from UNC Chapel Hill, and he wasn't asked to make one single revision in his dissertation.
Well, that's very fortunate. I didn't have to rewrite any sections, but I did have to add in some different little pieces that people wanted. So I'll take it. I'll take it.
So a couple of questions. One is, obviously everyone is enchanted with AI at the moment. Does AI play a role in any of this?
Yeah, so actually one of the articles that we wrote recently was aimed for individual investors, but we kind of asked the question, like, do you need a financial advisor, or do you need ChatGPT, right? Because ChatGPT is supposed to know everything. And one of the points we make in that article is that if you're looking for one-off, general financial advice, ChatGPT might be for you. But if you're looking for someone or a service, whatever you want to call it, that is going to provide emotional support, behavioral coaching, is going to be able to listen to your story and figure out what products, what services are right for you. If you're looking for that more personal relationship, I mean, that's where financial advisors really come into play. So
Yeah.
that's the point we try to make for investors.
Though, I will also say that, like, as an advisor, it might be worth seeing if you can make ChatGPT your friend as opposed to your enemy, right? If you're somebody who's not very comfortable with writing, see if you can get it to write something for you. I don't recommend using that on its own. Really, language is a human game still, but sometimes I know a number of colleagues who have used it to just help them try to get a more succinct version of what's going on in their head. And sometimes there are wordings that they can pull out from there that actually resonate with them, and then how do you apply it? So I say you can, you might be surprised that it could help you with this process if you engage with it and think about, well, that was compelling, that was not so compelling, what can I keep, what can I throw away, how do I put my own spin on it as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where I was going for the person who might be sort of not quite a wordsmith, maybe using it to help them figure out how do I word I'm good at behavioral coaching, right, or removing discomfort or whatever it might be. What about, I mean, it sounds like we have this 3-step exercise, we have the research report, but for someone who might need a little bit more handholding, is Morningstar going to do some behavioral coaching around this, create a practice management institute or consulting practice?
Oh, that would be a great idea. I think
I want credit.
There you go.
Your finder's fee.
So we don't have anything in the works along those lines. I mean, we do have plenty of research. So as Danielle and I mentioned in the beginning, I mean, that's kind of what we aim to do as a team, is produce these insights and make it actionable for advisors. So definitely keep an eye out for our work. We're on Morningstar.com if you ever listen to or want to read some of our articles. And at the end, we always try to provide some sort of exercise tool to make this actionable for advisors.
Yeah, that's really key. So as I think about this research, nothing exists in a vacuum. You've discovered some things that might require further research. What comes next?
What comes next? So we also asked people why they continue to have a financial advisor. So we're starting to tackle these questions one off, but I think that's going to be our next project, at least along these lines.
Yeah. All right. So we've covered a lot of ground. Anything we missed or anything that just bears reemphasizing before we wrap up?
I guess on my end, I mean, it's important for advisors to recognize that you can't hide from the emotional support that advisors now have to do. I mean, an advisor's job is now more complicated than ever because you can't just hide behind numbers and data, right? You have to be that personal relationship with their client. And it takes listening to research like ours, but there's plenty of more out in the field. But this is where the industry is going, I would say, and it's time to accept it and figure it out.
Yeah. And that's something that, again, it needs to be communicated. The industry knows where it's going. I think it's pretty clear in this situation. Sometimes it's, not so clear, but in terms of emotional support, behavioral guidance, we are seeing a lot of movement in that direction where financial advisors recognize that that's very important. But that doesn't mean that clients know. So again, it comes back to, you have to be really good at communicating these things with clients because they aren't going to know what they don't know. And you're probably their primary source of contact to discuss these issues. And so knowing that that's something not only that you have to work on when you are trying to provide guidance, but also communicating that you provide that guidance is a piece of the puzzle that advisors should work on as well, even though it's not always fun to do so.
Yeah. Danielle, Sam, I want to thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with our listeners and viewers. It's greatly appreciated.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Advisor podcast brought to you by the Investments and Wealth Institute. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe through iTunes, Spotify, or our website at www.investmentsandwealth.org/podcast to get the latest episodes of our Exceptional Advisor podcast series. For additional resources, updates on events, and exclusive membership deals, visit www.investmentsandwealth.org.
Hi, this is Tim Whiting. So most people know that New York City is the financial capital of the world. And what better place to hold a conference than right in the middle of Times Square at the New York Marriott Marquis. So come and join the Investments and Wealth Institute for our Investments and Wealth Forum, which will be held November 28th through 30th. Got a great agenda of speakers. It's the largest gathering of SEMA, CPWA, RMA, and CFP certificates in the metropolitan area. And you're just going to have a great time, a great experience, and get to see all the things that New York has to offer.